I want to talk to you about something else, which, let's see where we go with this. In-Q-Tel, right? And I'm sure you've heard of In-Q-Tel. I'm sure you know about it. It's the...
Trump on Thursday spoke at is at Arizona State University, which is the president is Michael Crow, who's the chair, is today and was since its inception in 1999 the chairman of In-Q-Tel.
And by the way, so what's your point with that, though?
My point on that is Arizona State University is this really interesting hub in Arizona. It's where Obama gave his first commencement speech, but it's got a huge censorship program there through something called the Center on Narrative, Disinformation, and Strategic Influence that's tied all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court with this disinformation task force that center's head was spearheading. The McCain Institute is highly active there with a giant censorship operation through its strategic communications program. There's so much censorship of the Trump world that runs through ASU, and it's part of something called their Global Security Initiative, the ASU Global Security Initiative, which is a formal intelligence program. So it's literally a U.S. government intelligence-funded domestic censorship program. And they get $1.6 million from the Pentagon to do this censorship black ops. They get another couple $100,000 from the State Department and the National Science Foundation. But it is just funny that Trump, sort of like he's always walking into the lion's den when it comes to everything from the Butler rally to going into, neighborhoods that, most people would think would be hostile to a Republican or doing these hostile interviews. He's walking into the ASU lion's den. And
so let's go through this for the average person that doesn't know. If you don't mind sharing the history of In-Q-Tel and what they do.
Yep. So In-Q-Tel was created in 1999. The internet had been private for about 8 years. Remember, the internet started off as a DARPA project. It was ARPA, then it would change its name to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Basically, it was created in the 1960s by the military because the military gets so much paperwork. They have to manage the entire American empire abroad. They have to manage counterinsurgency situations with 300 different languages and dialects. They're getting inbound paper, not just between different agencies within DoD, but all of their connective tissue to civil society and universities. They have to manage the huge amount of paperwork. And so they thought the most efficient way to do that would be using this new digital technology of computers and being able to send digital communications over effectively an intranet, a DoD internet. Then in 1990, we win the Cold War, and we are trying to do soft power influence projection across the world. We figure that if we can make this internet thing a dual-use technology where civilians can build on top of it, we can effectively make this new internet the same sort of powerful soft power projection tool that radio was when the CIA created Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Voice of America. All of these were State Department CIA proprietaries to be able to pipe in sentiment into foreign countries to influence the course of their events to advantage U.S. interests. We had a first mover advantage in movies, in film, in TV, in print. So the internet came online in 1991. Google got its start, in like 1996-ish. When Larry Page and Sergey Brin were Stanford PhDs, but their work that resulted in Google was a DARPA grant. The DARPA grant was a joint CIA-NSA program for tracking how birds of a feather flock together, because the CIA and NSA began to realize that internet traffic around Web 1.0, which was blogs and forums and static websites, could provide a political early warning radar system for the rise and fall of insurgency movements who were challenging U.S. interests overseas. So that's what created Google from 1996 to 1998. 1999, the CIA wants to formalize this. This is during the time of this tech boom, right? You had this big tech boom, and then you had this sort of bust from 99 to 2001. But around that time, the CIA saw how vast these new internet technologies were becoming in terms of their market size. They'd exploded so fast they began to rival big oil within a decade of their existence, where oil had been around for hundreds of years at that point. And so In-Q-Tel was created so that the CIA could basically buy a back channel influence over tech companies by being early stage investors, a venture capital arm. So they would get a little equity stake, but then they would also get the liaison back channel network with all the tech companies that they invested in, so they could be used as assets if necessary.
So they could be used as assets if necessary. So if you look at Rob, if you can go to IQT's website, if you just go to IQT.com and you look at maybe it's not IQT, just type in In-Q-Tel and then go to their website. There you go. What is a website about?
IQT.org.
Okay, so if you go a little lower, accept the cookies and go a little lower, and you see the portfolio. Keep going lower, keep going lower, keep going lower. Okay. So, no, go back, Rob. Go back. Okay, stay right there. Okay, GitLab. You see Palantir, right? Which, if I'm not, is that Peter? I think it is Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
Databricks, Advanced Navigation. And I think at one point, In-Q-Tel bought Keyhole, which Keyhole was like the map, right?
Yeah.
And then Keyhole was sold to Google. Then Google, I think in 04, 03, they bought it. In 04, 05, they turned into Google Earth.
Yep.
So in other words, Google Earth that we see now was once owned by the CIA and sold to Google. And then the Google, Sergey and Larry, have connection through Stanford, right? Which you were talking about earlier that they came about. When I think about Google and I see what they're, how they got started, between all the other guys, how much you think CIA has access to everything that Google does, access and influence to what Google does?
Well, I think they're back channel conversations, but I think most of them are had through civil society organizations staffed by CIA people rather than CIA directly.
Like you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's what the function of a lot of these multi-stakeholder forums are, or some of these, private NGOs that are often funded directly by the Pentagon or the State Department. There's a few things while we're on this, actually, on the In-Q-Tel. If you look up, I believe it was Li Fang who was the author. If you look up Li Fang, In-Q-Tel, Instagram, Twitter, mining. I pointed this out the other day because it's useful. This is because, I saw that you had the Global Security Initiative from ASU pulled up. And so this is, and I mentioned that they do all this internet censorship work. If you click that Intercept article from April 2016, and this is part of what that is. I mentioned that in the 1990s, the CIA and NSA were basically paying Stanford to fund the research of Sergey Brin and Larry Page for their mining of search engine aggregation results in order to detect what people around the world were searching for and what communities they were forming and what they were saying. Well, the CIA is doing the same thing through In-Q-Tel for the firms that do all the mass data scraping of tweets, Instagram photos, YouTube videos, Facebook posts, so that you have this kind of all-seeing eye from the intelligence world about political sentiment on social media. The other thing that I was going to mention was, I forget if it was on the In-Q-Tel front. It'll come back to me, but we can move on to the other.
If you go back to In-Q-Tel's Wikipedia, Rob, just go to In-Q-Tel's Wikipedia. I want to know the founders. Go. Is this so? Go to the founders. Norm. Let's see who Norm is. If you can zoom in there, zoom in. So is a U.S. aerospace businessman who served as U.S. Under Secretary of the Army, 75-77 Augustine, was served as a chairman of Lockheed Martin Corporation. He was chairman of the review of the United States Human Space Flight Plans Committee, 83. He was elected member of the National Academy of Engineering for the imaginative blending of the skill engineer. And if you go a little, is that it? That was the career? So where is the, and then go back to the other founder. Let's see who the other guy is. Yeah, he's a little bit interesting as well. American tech company who got to start as a video game designer, then co-founded.
Okay, can you freeze right there?
Yeah.
So you notice the other founder came from Lockheed.
Right.
And this one is the State Department's Foreign Affairs Policy Board. This is what I talk about all the time, which is that the CIA is because the tee up to this was, how extensive is the CIA's back channel or influence over Google? And I always try to stress that the CIA is second fiddle in everything it does. It only exists for two purposes. One is it is a plausibly deniable support agency for the State Department to pursue State Department goals, or it's a plausibly deniable covert support unit for the military for paramilitary DoD activity. Anytime you go from CIA director to head of the State Department, like Mike Pompeo did under Trump, or anytime you go from CIA director to head of the Defense Department, like Leon Panetta under Clinton, that's a promotion. The CIA has to answer to the State Department in everything it does. If it's doing national interest work, it has to answer to the DoD for everything that it does on the national security front. If it's supporting the DoD, it is not the final boss in the room. It is, it just does the dirty work. But the idea, it's not the brains of the operation. It's sort of the low-level hitman that Tony Soprano sends in to collect debt. It's not the head of the mafia in that sense.
Who's the head?
Well, what you have is this apparatus that's congealed. You have this defense diplomacy intelligence apparatus. And so you have these corporate and financial stakeholders who work together with the diplomat sphere and the military sphere to create a consensus. And the CIA will implement whatever plausibly deniable covert action consistent with the plausible deniability NSC 10-2 doctrine in order to implement that. But that plan is made above the CIA's head, and they have to answer every step of the way to that. So behind every dirty cloak and dagger CIA operation is a dirty assistant secretary at the State Department, or a dirty member of the State Department's policy planning staff, or a dirty undersecretary of defense, or a dirty person on the National Security Council who's coordinating that. They are the functionaries. They're the arms. They're not the brains of it. But what you see here, actually, in In-Q-Tel is the representation of both the State Department and the Pentagon. And the other thing I want to stress, though, and I just remembered this is the second thing that I wanted to come back to, was when we were talking about Google and its early role with the CIA and the NSA and DARPA. That sounds like an extraordinary story to people who got the typical sort of high school history lesson. But in fact, this is actually the same story as it has been for every major technology advancement in the past century and a half. If you go to my X account and you type in history GPS, you'll see a video. You'll see a video by, I believe it was George Friedman, who was the former head of Stratfor. Stratfor is known as the private CIA. This is the one. So just to tee this up real quick. So this is the guy who was the head of the private CIA, basically the career track there's two tracks at the CIA. There's the analyst track and the operations track. The analysts do intelligence. The operations do overthrowing governments, propaganda, counter intel, all that stuff. But the analyst track, they go on to jobs either at universities or at private sector intelligence firms like Kroll or like Stratfor. The Stratfor email leaks were actually a big deal with the Assange WikiLeaks. But this is George Friedman giving a talk. I believe it was in Dubai. But he's basically counseling one of the Gulf nation governments about how to create a robust technology sector, because everyone knows the biggest game in town is tech. Big tech has overtaken big oil. Even if you're an oil nation, you need to diversify where your incomes come from. And this, if you're not competing on technology, you're going to lose economically to those who do. So he's brought in to speak at this conference a few years ago, and he's telling them, listen, we believe in capitalism. We believe in in the power of the free market, but you want a really kick butt free market capitalist tech sphere to grow in your country. You need to have the government subsidize it. And I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive.
He's saying this?
Yes, he's saying you need to have your defense sector fund this and subsidize it. And he basically says, I know this sounds counterintuitive and it's a little at odds with free market, but let me tell you the history of how America got this way. And then if you want to let this play, this clip's about 2 minutes, but goes over the history of the GPS, the cell phone, the camera, all of this.
I want to begin with technology, because there is a belief here that technology is the key to geopolitical power. Well, perhaps it is. But let's first discuss technology. So, for example, this is an iPhone. You must have many of them. It's obviously a useful tool, and you have no idea of its history. I will now tell you its history. The cell phone was developed by the United States Army in the 1970s. It was first deployed by the U.S. Army. So your cell phone is a military tool. The microchip was commissioned by the U.S. Air Force to fly the F-14 and also cruise missiles. GPS, you use that to find your way around. So did the U.S. Navy, which commissioned the building of the GPS squadron so its submarines could know where they are. There's, of course, the camera. We all love the camera. I don't, but my wife does. It was developed for space satellite so that the film did not have to be dropped to Earth. It took pictures that could be transmitted as data to Earth. And of course, there's the internet, without which this wouldn't have any place, which is developed by DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, to move information from one point to another quickly, so we didn't have to mail it. In other words, to understand the technology of this age, you must understand the geopolitical requirements of the United States, the military that it created, and the technology that it really created as well. So you cannot look at the cell phone, the iPhone, the very cute little thing, the camera and everything else, without understanding its military origins.
Who is this guy?
George Friedman. This is the head of Stratfor, the private CIA. Hi, this is Mike Benz. You can connect with me on Connect for any questions that you have on internet censorship, foreign policy, national security, the blob, or if you want to know what a particular institution is doing that you may have seen or have questions about in terms of its control over the information ecosystem. So connect with me on Connect.
If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.